One. Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series 2023, where we aim to add value to people's lives, happening every Wednesday and Thursday on ebizradio.com. You can catch the Lunchtime Series on all major podcast channels. And guys, here's where we speak about everything leadership, coaching, and marketing. And joining on the coaching segment today, we have back with us a wonderful lady that we've chatted to before. She's the managing director of African Brand Architects, Shereen Hunter. Hello, Shereen. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Kevin. Thank you. Thanks for having me on your show, and hello to all the listeners.
Yes, it's been a while since you've been on, but I'm glad that you're back. I hope the new year is treating you well, and from what I understand, it is so far. You're nice and busy, right?
Yep. Roll on 2023. It's a new energy, new beginning. And I think for all intents and purposes, people are ready to work and get going again. I think, economies have opened up nicely. There's a lot of catching up to do still in many industries. But yeah, for me, January's been crazy. Tuck and roll, tuck and roll.
Absolutely. So, Shereen, today we're having a different kind of conversation, and I think a very necessary one. But don't you sort of want to preface this and sort of give us some insight of what it is we're going to be talking about?
Sure. So, I've titled the content today, Changing Lanes. And I think it is relevant, Kevin, because we've had so much change that happened, commercially over the last 2 years. I think everybody has accepted that they need to change lanes. Change needs to happen. But I think the way in which those changes are executed are absolutely vital. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today, because I'm seeing a couple of accidents on the side of the road, and I'm seeing cars bumping into each other in terms of commercial business. If you can imagine commercial business as a vehicle, I've seen a couple of real pitfalls on the roads of commerce when the decisions regarding changes are made, but there's no real plan, or possibly the detail is overlooked before the execution of that change.
Yeah. So, I think this is an important conversation to be having.
I think it's important because, 90% of the problem is not making the decision. For all intents and purposes, it does take people a very long time, normally, to be able to debate the different parts of their businesses or their career path, juggle the pros and the cons, and then get to a point where they make the decision. But certainly, when you make a decision, that's where the work starts, and that is not where the work stops. And how that change is implemented, as I say, is vitally important. You can't just make a decision to say, well, I want to pivot my business, or I'm going to pivot my career, but you don't really have a plan for it, and you haven't thought it through carefully enough, or you overlook some of the detail that is absolutely critical to the success of your future.
Do you think that there's a very obvious reason for why people are so fearful, based on the fact that people are, shouting out recession, and people are speaking about, the slump of what the economies are busy doing, and the world war, and all of these factors that play into this? We were just talking about the factors of big corp letting people go, and in the thousands of people they sort of just letting people go. And do you think that's one of the fear factors playing into not planning or changing lanes, or even wanting to? They just more caught up in fear than anything else.
So I think, fear to a point, I think fear is why people don't make decisions. That's what holds people back. They're afraid of the change. But I think more concerning for me is that once you overcome that fear, because I think when the pressure is so compounded on a business, I had a mentor who said to me, some decisions you make and others are made for you. You may not necessarily want to downsize your business, you may not want to retrench staff, and you can ride that wave up to a point where you can make that decision. But in the end, if you're going to salvage that business or rescue that business, sometimes the decision is made for you, and then you almost have to release people. It's not a decision anymore. The business makes the decision for you. And I think the conversation for me today is, if you get to that point where either you have made the decision or the decision was made for you, how do you then execute the release of 200 or 300 employees? the how that follows the decision.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people think making the decision is the most difficult part. It's only 50% of the challenge. Once the decision is made, how do you then roll that decision out? And that's where I'm seeing, Kevin, people are fumbling with the ball, because a lot of people are in a situation now where they don't have the luxury of having to make the decision. The decision is almost made for them. And now what is that execution plan? And you can't overlook the detail. And if we make this analogy very practical, and you can imagine yourself in a car and there are 3 lanes, right? And you want to change the lanes, you make a decision, there might be a car in front and you want to overtake that car. You don't make the decision, swerve into the right lane and then swerve back into the left lane. There's a series of decisions that are really granular that need to be made for you to be able to maneuver yourself safely from one position to the next. So you're going to look in your side mirror, you're going to look in your rearview mirror, you're going to make a judgment about the speed at which other vehicles are approaching you. You're going to put on your indicator. You're going to slowly move into lane when it is safe to do that. These are a lot of other smaller decisions that follow the overarching decision to change position. And this is where I'm seeing a huge gap in commerce. There are companies that are trading. They know they need to move from A to B. They now don't have a choice. They have to go there. But all those little granular decisions that make it safe for them to maneuver into the new position are often overlooked. So it could be, how do we expel 200 staff? How do we update the policies and procedures manual? Do we have the right people in the right places that will support this process? Do we have a professional team? Do we have the right advisors? So I'm seeing a lot of that detail overlooked. And literally what I'm seeing is businesses swerve from one lane into the other and then try to swerve safely back into the lane that they want to be in. And I think that's very dangerous.
So, I mean, why would anyone want to change lanes? Because what's interesting about that is because, people love their comfort zones. And I know, external factors could influence that. But I mean, why would you literally like sit down with yourself and kind of go, okay, have a strong conversation with self and kind of go, okay, I need to change lanes and this is what I need to do and this is what's going to happen. Why would anyone want to do that?
So I don't even think changing lanes is an option. I think in the story of your life over a period of however many years, you actually do have to change lanes. And for exactly the same reason that a car on the highway would need to change lanes. The circumstances of your life change, your environment changes, who you are surrounded by changes, the conditions change. Whether it's sunshine or rain or mist, whether there are trucks on the road, whether you're facing congestion, whether somebody hits the brakes in front of you. So if you imagine, again, your business as a vehicle that's moving down a highway, because the environment is changing continuously around you, it would take you so much longer to get to where you go if you do everything the same every day. You have to change lanes. You must know how to move safely from one set of trading conditions into another set of trading conditions within that specific environment. So I think where we see a lot of business decline is, and we always talk about it, is partly cliched, Kevin, is people say, this is the way we've always done it. It's like staying in your one lane and driving 100 kilometers an hour from here to Cape Town, regardless of what is happening around you. Almost putting your head in the ground like an ostrich and saying, well, I don't care if there was a global crisis. I don't care if we have an electricity crisis in South Africa. I'm not going to relook my staff complement or my human capital value. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because it always worked for me, and we're just going to stay on that course and stay in that lane, keep moving at that speed. And I mean, essentially, you just end up being run off the road, or it's going to take you very long to where you want to go. You may arrive at your end destination, but it may take you 40 years to get there instead of 15 hours. And is that really the way that we want to develop and grow in commerce? So I think there's a growing responsibility as commerce moves at such a fast pace and momentum, technology driving this, skills, across the board being raised, artificial intelligence. I don't think any business can afford to stay in the same lane for very long at any given time.
It always reminds me, being here, and I mentioned on these conversations, is there's something, as an NLP practitioner, one of the laws that we live by is the law of requisite variety. And that just simply means the person with the most flexibility of choices and behavior rules the system. And, I think that's, if we look at the fact that recession is potentially happening, the fact that AI is taking over the world in such a way and happening at such a pace, and like you say, putting your head in the sand is it's not useful. So I think it's really getting on board with learning that even if you're above the age of 40, and I say that respectfully, but generally, people who are older than 40 are kind of set in their ways, and they kind of set in their routines, and they know what works for them, and they know what they're comfortable with. But I don't think we're living in a world where you can afford to just be comfortable. Like, I think part of your business mechanism needs to be on the forefront of how things are changing, what is changing, and does it mean I have to change at any level? And I think that's that conversation needs to be brought to the foreground, because as you say, it's almost a responsibility that we have as business owners. And also, if we, part of an economy like South Africa, we can't afford to kind of just, and I don't think South Africans are that kind of people. We tend to get on with things no matter what, happens. So what are for you, like, what are the kinds of things that you need to do when you want to change lanes? What are the things that comes up, and how do we prepare ourselves and get this going?
Yeah. Well, I think, there are a couple of things, and you actually touched on primary things that people need to do, and that is learnership. I think in your business, you're going to move forward one of two ways. You are going to move forward because there's a pressure top down, where the leader is skilled, equipped, and understands the landscape into the future, and then puts pressure on the people in that organization to get to a certain level, to reposition themselves. So it's either going to come from the leader saying to the people in his organization, I see the wood for the trees, I see what the future looks like, this is what we need to do to adapt and change and upgrade, if you want to say that. And it takes that organization into the future. And then the opposite is where the leader has not learned or skilled or improved or upgraded himself in an environment that is changing at the rate of knots. And the pressure then comes bottom up, because you start to, at a very operational grassroots level, start to get things like clients, losing clients, not being able to be successful in pitching, to feel it on the bottom line, because the people who are being serviced by that organization are now dissatisfied. So the pressure comes from the bottom up, from the staff and the employees, who become disgruntled and frustrated, saying to the leadership of that organization, something is wrong with this model, something needs to give. We are not positioned correctly, but often they don't really know what the problem is. They'll describe the symptom, but not the cause. So I think one of the big things that you need to do if you want to change lanes, reposition your brand, is the learnership of it, to understand that landscape. And if you can't skill yourself fast enough as the leader of your own organization, the second point, or the second tactic, I would say, is to have a professional team. I mean, you may be very comfortable driving code 4, is a code 4, normal car, but suddenly when you're going on, off a beaten track and the circumstances have changed, you might find yourself better off in a bigger vehicle that you don't have a license for. And I think this I see unfolding a lot in commerce as well. Either the circumstances have changed and the vehicle needs to change to have to get through that track or road. It's off the tar, it's a beaten track. So you need to change your vehicle, get out the car, get onto a big truck or onto earth-moving equipment to get to the next road. You may not have the license for that. And then I think what is very important is to surround yourself with a team of professionals who can help you. And I love to always say, and I've said in London on the Underground, mind the gap. because from time to time in your business, there may be gaps that you as the leader are not competent to fill. And I know it sounds like a harsh word, competent, but you don't know everything when you're a leader. Sometimes your business outgrows you. You can have a business that's producing R1 million a year, hit the sweet spots in the market, take that business from R1 million to R6 million a year, and suddenly all the moving parts start to fall apart because you don't have the right human capital, you don't have the right resources, you don't have the right technology, you don't have experience in that space, you don't have the right tools for the job. And you have to mind that gap. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot of analytics that's involved. I mean, what I'm describing now is quite a complex challenge that I think most South African businesses are facing, whether they've had to scale up because they've had radical growth spurts or scale down because they've drastically dropped in their profitability. And I think one of the big mistakes we make as leaders is to think we need to be all things to all people, we need to have all the answers, and we don't really. I think what we do need to recognize is when we need the help and take the necessary precautions and make sure that we make informed decisions and not just swerve from one lane into another lane.
But that does that also mean that we also suffer a little bit of egotistic sort of approach because like I've done this, I've achieved this, I've accomplished this, I know what I'm doing, and really get stuck there where you kind of go, okay, no, the landscape is changing, and how we do what we do is changing. I need the foresight and kind of the skill as a leader to step out of the way and go, this is not something I'm good at. Let me find someone who's good at it and really play at other people's strengths. And I mean, if you look at Richard Branson, he often speaks about, he's not always the smartest person in the room, but he has some really smart people in his team, and because I mean, that just makes sense. Do you think that's also part and parcel of what leaders really need to do is start, I don't know, owning their owning their own competencies and really just being okay with that?
Absolutely. Look, I think there may be an element of ego to it, but I don't think it's all ego. I think sometimes the leader doesn't even realize they're punching above their weight or they're in deep water. Often what happens is the leader in crisis in a business gets so hands-on involved that they're not actually analyzing the landscape, and they're not actually even realizing what is busy happening. They are far too engaged in the business to be able to give an objective view of the business. So they can get into deep water before they realize there's actually a very, very severe problem. So it's a little bit of unconsciously unconscious. If you go down to those levels of consciously conscious, unconsciously unconscious. So often what happens is for a period of time, the leader doesn't even realize the seriousness of the situation or how simple it is to solve the problem. Because if you've never had to solve that problem before, it might take you months to get to an answer versus someone who's solved this problem 5 or 6 times before in another industry who could help you maneuver quite tactically and quickly out of that. So I think part of it is relationship. I want to always come back to that relationship economy. And that is that as a leader of an organization, you have a responsibility to continue to speak to other leaders and share your challenges and share your problems and ask for solutions outside of your respective industry so that your level of consciousness, it kind of is continually growing, and then that you are able to identify quite quickly when there's a problem in front of you, like sitting in front of an exam paper, you get to question 13 and you're like, I don't have any idea how to fix the problem. The quickest way to answer the question is raise your hand and say to the teacher, can you help me? And I think we need to take that back into a work environment. At the highest levels, people need help. And sometimes the answer is staring you straight in the face and you just need someone to explain it slightly differently, and you start to join the dots as the leader. And sometimes leaders don't have the answers and they really need somebody to just come into that space and direct them around the pothole or the storm or the gravel road.
So, I mean, how often do you think we should be changing? people could get to the point where they're doing a lot the whole time, and they're kind of going, okay, maybe you're overdoing this. Maybe you should slow down a little bit and just change lanes, but know whether this is the lane you want to be in or not. How do you differentiate that?
Yeah. I'll bring it back to the car on the highway. You don't want to be swerving between lanes all the time. So some people think they're doing a great job when they keep making changes, agility. But I think there's a real danger in that. What is the most peaceful drive is actually when you're in the right lane, you can put the cruise control on, you are relaxed and you are actually enjoying the drive. And when a car brakes in front of you, that you've got enough time to brake, that your indicators are working, and and it's the same with your business. You don't want to be swerving between the cars on the highway all the time to try and get to the destination first. What you want is a safe drive, and a drive where you can be alert and aware, not overly exhausted driving that business, well rested, that you can enjoy the drive. So yeah, and I think it also depends on the environment around you, Kevin. If you can be on the best drive down to Cape Town, and if a storm comes up, you are going to slow down. You are going to put on your windscreen wipers. You are going to demist that windscreen. It's a decision that's taken for you. So I think for the most part, you don't want to be swerving all over the road. But when life happens and the environment changes and it demands those changes to be done quickly, whether it's hitting the brakes, putting the indicator on, putting on your fog lights, then you must be able to do that quite fast.
Can you sort of give us an example where you've practically seen a company needing to do this? Sort of how the importance of that changing lane becomes. Do you have a sort of a scenario you can share that with us to give people more of an insight on where it's recently happened?
Sure. I think every single client that I've dealt with has had to change lanes. And I've seen some people do it very quickly, and I've seen other people not do it at all, despite the fact that you can see this car is going to end up in an accident. I prefer not to use examples, actually, to be honest, because I think the changing lanes process as a business leader is a very personal one. I'm just trying to think, maybe one of the success stories of changing lanes would be the Women of Stature brand that I work with. I mean, they've done a fantastic job during the lockdown, from taking what was a very localized provincial brand to a national footprint to now what is a national brand, and attracting international investors into South Africa. So rather than taking South African ideas and exporting them to the rest of the world, what they've done is they're importing investors from the rest of the world, which was a really, really smart thing to do.
Yeah.
And investors who are specifically investing in women-owned businesses in South Africa. So that would have been a great example of changing lanes. And Charlotte Duplessis, who is the founding member of that brand, was able to do that over the last 36 months, very successfully.
And just like, I think what is, what are in that kind of success story, what was the actual changing lane kind of option? Was it, different marketing? Was it different sort of resources that they tapped into? Was it different connecting, networking? What was the lane that sort of shifted it for them?
I think what was happening in the Women of Stature brand when we went into lockdown is that it was in-person contact, face-to-face meetings. In fact, that was the model. Small groups of women working with each other in a very personal way in terms of relationship. We then went into lockdown, and that entire model had to evaporate overnight. So the next level of changing lanes then was Charlotte took her entire model online, which a lot of businesses did. The meetings became virtual, and by default, they became international because the access from around the world to now participate in these business networking meetings. So in that sense, she had changed the lane, but another factor came into it. with a lot of women from around the world then joining those meetings, Charlotte had her superpower is building relationships. She would notice the new ladies in the room, start conversations with them in different countries, a whole other avenue of opportunity. And then I think the next thing which she did very well is she recognized the real sorrow of the local South African business market for women who say, I do want to grow and scale my business, but I cannot afford to get on an aeroplane and fly to another country and go and sit in a conference, spending 30, 40,000 Rand when business is hemorrhaging locally in South Africa. And she saw the gap and she plugged it, because then what she started doing is inviting people who are specifically looking to invest in Africa and in women-owned businesses to South Africa, to her events, who did have the resources to be able to mobilize themselves and buy an airplane ticket and travel to South Africa and then be hosted here in South Africa by her and her team. So, I think some of it was by default, but she read the landscape well. And as the economy closed down and as meetings closed down in South Africa, she very quickly went on to hybrid. So that was very clever. She was able to maneuver into the next lane. And then when she was in that fast lane, she realized there's a lot of competitors in the space, lots of cars in that fast lane, everybody's online, but what everybody's not providing is funding for women-owned businesses. There's the next big gap. And she then plugged that gap and moved into the next lane.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a wonderful practical way of kind of looking at how that happens. It's like, what is and I think it takes a bit of curiosity as the leader of a business to kind of go, okay, cool. What am I not seeing? What am I not looking at? What am I potentially missing? And being able to be aware and have an awareness of where those gaps are that you can constantly probe and sort of learn from. So yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful example. If you could leave the audience today with just some practical steps on really changing lanes and taking steps towards doing that, what would that be? Because I think a lot of people are going, maybe I do need that. Maybe I do need a shift in gears, or I need to do something, but I'm not really sure how. How do we do this?
Well, I think the single biggest indicator that you need to change lanes and that you do need to recognize as a business owner is that there are problems, and your job is to solve those problems. And I think far too many people live with problems in their businesses. They live with problems in their life. They don't confront the problem, and sometimes because they don't have the emotional strength to face it, sometimes because they just don't know how to solve it. So we live with the problems that we don't know how to solve. Or that we feel inwardly we can't face. And I would say if there are problems in your business, they say the best brands in the world do one thing: they solve problems. So go back to your own business, have frank and honest, conversation with yourself and possibly your leadership team or a trusted advisor on what are the obvious problems that you have in your business, and solve those first, and then really ask yourself the question, how is my business solving other people's problems? Because if you're just running a business based on what you love to do and what you're passionate about, but it doesn't solve someone else's problems, you're probably struggling in your business. So I would just say, it comes back to the problem solving and the gumption to know, listen, I'm not coping in the space, or I don't have answers for the space. Reaching out and getting somebody to help you, or a team of people to help you cross the bridge or change the lane.
Or alternatively, just get hold of Shereen and she will help you through it.
Yeah.
Shereen Hunter, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I always love chatting with you. You always have wonderful things to make me think. If anybody wants to get hold of you, what's the easiest way to do that?
No, the best way is probably send me an email, Shereen@africanbrandarchitects.com.
Fantastic. Guys, African Brand Architects Managing Director Shereen Hunter, thank you for your time and thanks for chatting with us.
Absolutely a pleasure, Kevin. Thank you for having me on your show again.
Chat soon. Cheers for now.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye.